Before I call the honourable member for Shrewsbury, I wish to make a short statement. I've been advised that the member in charge wishes to raise relevant cases which are not currently sub judice, but which have been subject to a completed police investigation and coroner inquests. Caution must be exercised by any member wishing to speak when raising the specifics of relevant cases. Order. Julia Buckley to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, for granting this Westminster Hall debate today on road safety for young drivers and for allowing me to present the opening statement to our Minister for the Future of Roads, Lillian Greenwood. And thank you so much for giving up your time today to engage in this discussion. Road traffic collisions are the biggest killer of young people aged 15 to 29 worldwide. And in 2023 here in the UK, 290 young people were killed as a result of a road collision. That's nearly 1/4 of all road collisions. So although drivers under 24 only make up 6% of total licence holders, they represent 18% of all car drivers killed and seriously injured. And that's because 1 in 5 newly qualified drivers will have an accident in their first year. If there were any other leading cause of death of our young people, we would declare a public health emergency and prioritise resources to tackle this crisis. Unfortunately, young people are also more likely to be involved in crashes with multiple injuries and which involve a greater number of people, and there is heavy evidence to suggest younger and less experienced drivers carry a heavier risk. The road safety campaigners BRAKE point to some development-related risks, including the level of brain development, overconfidence, poor assessments of hazards, as reasons as to why young drivers are more prone to serious accidents. I will.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady and for the way that she's laying out the case this morning. I wonder if she agrees with me that preventing young people from speeding is one of the ways we prevent this number of accidents. She'll know, as I do, that it's very difficult to get fixed speed cameras in place. The current government guidance is for 3 serious accidents or deaths before fixed speed cameras can be put in place. And I wonder if she agrees with me that a preventative approach would be much more successful than a punitive approach.
I thank the Honourable Member for her intervention, and I do agree that all measures that can prevent any collisions or injuries and deaths should absolutely be explored, and often prevention is not only better but cheaper than dealing with the consequences if we don't. Research from Rossborough has also shown that young drivers have poorer visual awareness. They display a smaller range of horizontal scanning of the road, they check their mirrors less, and they focus more on stationary objects rather than moving objects. In rural areas like my constituency in Shrewsbury, these statistics are compounded by the disproportionate danger on countryside roads, according to the NFU's Mutual's Rural Road Safety Report in 2024. There were nearly 1,000 deaths on rural roads that year. Tragically, collisions on rural roads are 4 times more likely to end in a fatality. Their report showed that drivers are concerned about rural hazards, which are often entirely different to those on urban roads, and require a specific set of skills and awareness, including looking out for livestock, agricultural vehicles, lack of lighting or road marking, narrow passing points, and lack of visibility, blind corners, poor road quality, highlighting the need for improved road maintenance and infrastructure. I will give way, sir.
Giving way and congratulate her on securing the debate. Would she agree with me and joins me in congratulating charity groups like the one in my area called Life After, that tends to deal with people who've suffered trauma and loss of life of close partners or relatives in road traffic accidents, and do so much to try and help people beyond that traffic accident that she's so eloquently talking about, and help to deal with people, and the types of education like that would help young people in the future.
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his intervention, and I do agree that it's absolutely excellent to hear of any support for families who have been bereaved as a result of a collision, and then to use that to educate others so that we can try to prevent this in the future. Thank you for your intervention. However, a majority of drivers wrongly assume that urban roads are more dangerous, and this in itself leads to an underestimation of the risks involved in driving on rural roads. The NFU Mutual has produced a code for countryside roads to support education and awareness, raising of the specific driving skills that would help. This could be incorporated into the driving test or a follow-up course of additional learning as part of the driver's probationary period. Many young people who live in rural areas feel isolated and, as a consequence, feel compelled to start driving as early as possible because of the lack of public transport, leaving them unable to access college, work, social or sporting activities. In Shropshire, we have lost over 5,000 bus routes since 2010, and 17-year-olds are increasingly driving their first car out of necessity, something that would be anathema to a teenager growing up in London or Manchester, where public transport is so easy and cheap to use. I will.
Thank you. I congratulate my constituency neighbour on bringing this critical debate, and she's making an excellent case for improving road safety for young people. I wonder if she'd agree with me that actually putting public transport infrastructure in place is really critical to giving people options to have a social life, to feel less isolated in rural areas without having to get in the car at a very young and very risky age.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention, and I couldn't agree more, and I think it particularly affects young people living in rural areas. So it's not surprising then that between 2019 and 2023, nearly half of casualties in young car driver collisions occurred on rural roads. But each of those numbers is a person, a young person with their whole life ahead of them, a son or daughter whose family love and cherish them. And each death is an avoidable... I will.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. My constituent, Sharon Huddleston, has been campaigning after tragically losing her daughter Caitlin in 2017. She was one of those children on those rural roads that tragically lost her life as a passenger in a young novice's car. Sharon founded the Forget Me Not group Uniting, and they've campaigned for restrictions on the number of passengers that young drivers can carry in the car and restrictions on nighttime driving. What haunts me is the fact that had we listened to people campaigning on this over 40 years ago, Caitlin would still be here today. Would my honourable friend agree that it's time that we looked at this seriously and put these restrictions in place to protect those young drivers and other people on the road?
I thank the Honourable Member for her intervention, and I think we're going to be hearing lots of suggestions today about all the measures that can help try to prevent these tragedies. Because each death is an avoidable tragedy that freezes them in time, forever prevented from growing up to fulfil their full potential. Such as Harvey Owen, the son of my constituent, who was killed in a fatal car crash whilst travelling from Shrewsbury with 3 other young men, all of whom were killed in the accident. 4 young lives, taken too soon and leaving their families behind with an unbearable void where their child should be. Crystal Owen, Harvey's mother, has taken that raw pain and channelled her energy into a focus campaign. She is dedicated and selfless in her advocacy of young drivers and their families. It is on behalf of Crystal Owen that I have requested today's debate. She is sitting with us here today, surrounded by families, other families of young people also killed in serious car crashes. And I thank you all for coming today for what cannot be an easy day. We really appreciate your presence. They have formed a support group called Forget Me Not to campaign together so that nobody else has to suffer as they have. With Crystal's permission, I'm now going to read out the story of Harvey Owen, written in her words, because nothing I could say could do justice to her personal tragedy. Crystal's story. My kind-hearted son Harvey had just turned 17 in November 2023. A couple of weeks later, he asked me if he could go to Wales with 2 friends he had known since school. It was to be his first weekend away with friends, and as a parent, I felt it was time to give him a little freedom. He and his friends planned to stay at one of their granddad's houses, and when I heard this, I thought, what harm can come to him? It was a trusted friend's family in a safe place. It felt like the right thing to do, to let him experience a little bit more independence. At this age, you need to give them a little freedom, right? So I agreed. After seeing a video of one of the parents confirming where they were staying, I had no reason to doubt Harvey's story about who was driving. We had always known Harvey's friends. Our home was often where the boys would gather to play music for many years. As far as we knew, he had no friends who had even passed their driving tests, so we felt comfortable with the situation. Harvey seemed so grown up now, mature and responsible. I thought to myself, he was ready for this. Before he left, Harvey sat in his bedroom playing Ring of Fire on his guitar, knowing I loved this song. I told him how proud I was of him, how talented he was. I gave him a hug, telling him I loved him. He jokingly told me to stop being weird and then said he loved me too. And not long after that, he left. It was the last time I would ever see my beautiful son. The following morning, Harvey sent me a picture message of the view from the cottage, and everything seemed fine. However, what I didn't know at the time was that the boys had decided to go on a camping trip. It later transpired that another 18-year-old boy Harvey had recently met at college, a newly qualified driver, had also gone and was actually the one driving. Just over an hour later, after sending me the text, my son and his 3 friends were dead. After some of my texts didn't go through, I started to get concerned. The next thing I knew, we were frantically driving around Snowdonia, having discovered they were missing. Our worry soon turned to panic, and we made our way to Bangor police station. The feeling of being told they had found 4 bodies, and they believed one to be my son, is indescribable. The pain of that moment felt as much physical as it did mental. It was as if my world had stopped right there, in that instant. A suffocating numbness washed over me, and I felt I was being ripped apart from the inside. Time felt like it froze, like everything around me became a blur. It was as though the world was no longer a place I wanted to be. The life I had known, filled with my son's laughter, his music, his dreams, was ripped away in an instant. It is an unbearable shock and pain. I wanted to die myself just to escape the nightmare I was now living. The thought of facing a world without my son, without his presence, was too much to bear. I don't remember much after this moment. My partner said I was howling, saying on repeat it couldn't be Harvey. I knew in that instant I would only exist for the rest of my days. It later emerged that the young driver had lost control of the car on a bend of a rural road. The vehicle ended up in a water-filled ditch, and despite their attempts to escape, all 4 boys tragically drowned. The news of their deaths was overwhelming. To know that Harvey and his friends had suffered such a tragic end, unable to survive and escape the car, is a pain I cannot put into words. The grief I feel in the wake of this loss is all-consuming. The loss of my son has left a permanent aching void in my life. It's something that unless you are unfortunate enough to ever experience yourself, you will never come close to understanding pain. In the months following Harvey's passing, I could barely function, only leaving my bed to attend the funeral. The circumstances surrounding his trip have weighed heavily on me. I would never have allowed him to go if I had known the full details. A friend informed me that in some countries, newly qualified drivers are not allowed to take peer-age passengers for a set period and are required to gain experience on rural roads first. It seemed like common sense to me, and I thought it was a no-brainer. After weeks of research, I began my campaign to make driving safer for young drivers, advocating for change in the light of the shocking statistic that 76% of fatalities in crashes involving young drivers are not the driver themselves. Anyone could be affected. I've had to publicly share my grief, putting it on display for the media in order to leverage their coverage and raise awareness about the horrifying statistics around young drivers' death crashes. All of this while I still haven't had the time or space to process my own pain. In October 2024 at the inquest, we learned that the boys had all been practically unharmed by the crash. They were conscious and tried to escape the car. Thanks to the manual back windows, Harvey was able to wind his window down. However, due to the lack of a simple safety hammer, something that could have shattered the glass in seconds and cut through seatbelts, precious time was lost. The thought of Harvey and the boys' final moments will haunt me for the rest of my life. I strongly believe that such a safety tool should be made mandatory in all cars. While it's difficult to determine how many lives such devices could save in the long run, in cases like Harvey's, it would have made the difference between life and death. Although ultimately I feel it's a reactive solution to a more deep-rooted problem. If my son wasn't able to get in the car due to safety measures to protect newly qualified drivers and their passengers, he would not need the hammer, as the crash would not have taken place. My campaign is not about punishing young people, but about protecting them. Implementing these safety measures would help safeguard their lives by addressing the risks associated with inexperience and impulsivity, allowing them to enjoy their freedom without facing unnecessary danger. During the course of the inquest, the evidence revealed matters giving rise to concern, which the coroner published, stating that he felt there is a risk that future deaths will occur unless action is taken where younger people are carried in motor vehicles driven by newly qualified and/or young drivers, and that preventative action should be taken. After nearly a year of campaigning, I should have felt relief when the coroner issued this Preventing Future Deaths report. But sadly, as part of the Forget-Me-Nots Families United group, I know that similar recommendations have been made in the past with no real change. Unfortunately, there will never be a victory for families like ours because our children are gone forever. If people truly understand the depth of our pain, along with the level of commitment we parents put into researching the overwhelming evidence, we might be taken more seriously in our fight for change. I hope this debate forces everyone to confront the scale of the problem. Every day without action means more families torn apart, more lives lost. Protecting young drivers, their passengers and other road users should never be a matter of political division. It's a moral issue. The evidence is clear. Young people's brains are still developing, making them more prone to risky decisions behind the wheel. Protecting young drivers isn't just about statistics, it's about lives lost. Thank you, Crystal, for your story. We really appreciate that. So, Mr. Chairman, to conclude, how can we keep young people safe on our roads? There are many calls for additional training or support for newly qualified drivers. The Association of British Insurers concludes that over 2/3 of insurers now employ some form of telematics or black boxes to monitor driving behaviours by new drivers to reduce risk factors. We've heard proposals to increase training and awareness of the risks on rural roads, as well as the need to invest in and maintain them to reduce dangerous hazards. We could invest more in public transport in our rural areas to offer our young people a viable alternative mode of transport to access services. And finally, there are also proposals for that specific safety measures, such as mandating the carrying of an emergency glass hammer in an emergency glass hammer in every vehicle as a new standard. These devices can then smash the window glass or cut the seatbelt in case of emergency. We could call them Harvey's hammer, in memory of one young man from Shrewsbury whose legacy has brought us all here today. Thank you.
That's a 3-minute limit on backbench speeches. The question is that this House has considered road safety for young drivers. I call Anna Sabine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member for Shrewsbury for calling this important debate. And that is an incredibly difficult speech to follow. I'm feeling very emotional, so thank you very much, and thank you to all the families that are here today. I have 2 teenage children, one of whom is now 18 and is about to start to learn to drive. In my constituency of Fruman East Somerset, it's really helpful if young people can drive themselves around, because especially in villages like the one he lives in, they're often at the mercy of unreliable or infrequent bus services. And of course, as his mum, I'm encouraging him to learn. He'll be able to be more independent, and I think it's an important life skill. But I have some really serious concerns about his safety when he does start to drive. My constituency has a lot of A roads which are windy and fast, and often have junctions off to the side where drivers are trying to pull out onto the main road. We have a history of accidents in the local area, including a horrendous one in 2023, where 2 young sisters were killed by an oncoming vehicle driven by a driver who was high on drugs. This particular accident took place in a very dangerous junction outside Frome, and I'm campaigning for traffic lights to be installed here, but I'm coming up against lack of council or government funding to get this new infrastructure installed. We can't put in the kind of preventative measures my honourable friend for Hazel Grove mentioned if we can't fund them. We know from figures provided by Brake that 1 in 5 drivers crash within a year of their test, and more than 1,500 young drivers are killed or injured on the roads each year. We know that carrying passengers or driving at night is a major risk factor for younger drivers, and I can certainly remember careering around the roads where I grew up as a teenager, in cars packed with friends, listening to music too loudly. The thought makes me shudder when I look back on it. And we also know that sadly younger drivers are more likely to be involved in a crash caused by speed. I think serious consideration needs to be given to graduated driving licences. Graduated driving licences, yes.
Just a point I want to raise to the member. Well, she said, realising, I thank the member for bringing the debate. In Northern Ireland, we still have what is restricted driving, where a newly qualified driver must display an R plate and is restricted to 45 miles an hour for 1 year after passing their test. So not everything has to be new. There are places where some restrictions are working for the graduate scheme that the member's suggesting.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and I'm keen that when we have a discussion about this, we look at good practice from other places. Graduated driving licences can be set up in a number of different ways, but typically might involve minimum periods for learning to drive and reducing the number of passengers a young person could have in the car. In the UK, we already have a version of this system for motorbikes. We recognise that young motorcyclists probably shouldn't ride the most powerful bikes straight away, and we restrict them accordingly. Even motoring groups like the RAC have supported moves towards a graduated driving licence scheme in recent times, and I intend to explore the idea within my own political party. I can totally understand why young people might resist or resent the idea of graduated driving licences, and I can see why in rural areas like mine or the member for Shrewsbury's, really stringent restrictions on driving, like preventing young people driving at night, might make it very hard for young people to get to their jobs or go to educational settings if buses aren't frequent enough. But I think it warrants a conversation because it's young people who have the most to lose if we can't get this discussion right.
Anna Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Sir Desmond, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend and the member for Shrewsbury for bringing forward this really important debate and sharing so movingly the tragic death of her constituent Harvey. So thank you for that. Road safety is a serious concern for my constituents in Shipley. In 2023, 183 reported injuries and 1 fatality on our roads. Prior to being elected in early 2024, I campaigned with the local councillor Marcus Dearden and our West Yorkshire Mayor Tracy Braben to address speeding issues in Bingley. We successfully secured average speed cameras on a 50-mile-an-hour stretch of dual carriageway, which was often used as a racetrack by young drivers. But it's challenging to get these sort of security measures, these road safety measures in place. We've heard already from others just the higher risk that young drivers face. So 1 in 4 of deaths from collisions involve a young car driver, and we know it's more prevalent for young men. We've also heard, so movingly, the huge impact this has on families. When I was growing up, a school friend's younger brother died tragically in a motorbike accident on the A65 between Ilkley and Burley and Wharfdale in my constituents, and I know that both the parents and brother have suffered a lifetime of grief as a result of that accident. I strongly support West Yorkshire Vision Zero. This is a partnership approach to eliminate all traffic fatalities and serious injuries by 2040, and it brings together the combined authority, the local authority, the emergency services, national highways, as well as victim support services and road safety campaigners. And I really would hope that such approaches are implemented and supported nationally by the Minister. We do need to make it easier for local people to identify and push for where there needs to be speed cameras in speeding hotspots. And finally, I would urge the Minister to look at some consideration of post-test licence restrictions, whether that is through amendment to the Road Traffic New Drivers Act 1995, which already introduces a new driver probation period of 2 years. In closing, I would just emphasise that we must also recognise that older drivers do pose a risk themselves and others, and so we see that those over 86 have a similar risk as those to young men, and perhaps I will bring this forward as a topic for future debate. Thank you.
Cameron Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. It's an honour to serve under your chairship. I commend my honourable friend for Shrewsbury for securing this important debate. Just 3 weeks after the 2024 general election, 4 young men were killed in Ullenwood, just outside my constituency, when their car collided with a tree, 3 20-year-olds and 1 18-year-old. "This is Andre, my child full of dreams," his mother said in a tribute to her son. It's not always young people who suffer such accidents, of course, but many suffer vicariously through the loss of their loved ones. I recall the deaths of 2 motorcyclists separately within 90 minutes on the same stretch of road on the 30th of August 2023. One lost his life near Ashchurch and the other near Evesham. One was a friend of a friend. Let the record recall Philip Beer, described by his lifelong friend Richard Price as an ex-Conservative councillor in Long Levens ward, but the good type of Tory, very modest, very moderate and centrist, and who had voted for Labour and the Liberal Democrats in recent years. He was a Spurs supporter, and he left behind his wife Louise and his children Izzy, Charlie and Henry. I've spoken previously of my admiration for those members of the emergency services who so selflessly put themselves in harm's way to protect and treat others. I hope those in this room will spare a thought for our police officers, paramedics and firefighters who arrive at the scenes of road traffic collisions. Back in July, I learned a truly shocking statistic that 1 in 5 young people will be involved in a reportable road traffic collision in the year following their driving test. In 2023 alone, there were 281 road collisions in the Tewkesbury constituency. Just under 20% of those were aged between 17 and 24. One young person per week just in Tewkesbury. Driving is popular amongst all demographics within my constituency. Many young people use cars to travel to school, to see their friends and to play for local sports teams. Like Shrewsbury, Tewkesbury, with its broadly dispersed towns and villages, suffers from irregular and unreliable modes of public transport, thus driving is heavily relied upon. According to the Department of Transport in the Gloucestershire region since 2015, there's been a 24% decline in the number of passenger journeys on local bus services. We should acknowledge, though, that for many young people, learning to drive is both a significant milestone and a source of immense pride, but one which exposes them to significant risk. 17 to 25-year-old men have higher rates of fatal road collision than almost every other age group, second only to over 85s. One initiative that I proudly endorse is the Under-17s Pathfinder initiative, which is active in Gloucestershire, West Mercia, Yorkshire and Humberside. It's a low-cost and socially mobile initiative with various bursaries available so that young people of all socio-economic backgrounds can benefit. Volunteers at the initiative guide aspiring drivers through theoretical and practical training in a controlled environment away from public roads. I visited the initiative in South Cerney in August 2024 and was driven around safely by a young lady under tuition alongside her father. The reduction of speed limits is controversial amongst drivers. I sometimes find the practice frustrating myself, but this cannot be about our own frustrations, rather our children. A reduction in the speed limit on high-risk routes in Lincolnshire resulted in a 75% reduction in killed or seriously injured collisions, and for that reason I would endorse the practice in Gloucestershire. I hope the Minister will take those statistics back to her department alongside my endorsements. Thank you.
Rachel Taylor.
Meetings. Thank you to my honourable friend for Shrewsbury for organising this debate. I'm speaking here today because road safety for young drivers is a crucial issue in my constituency. As a semi-rural constituency, learning to drive is a huge part of becoming independent from your parents. Indeed, my parents forced me to learn to drive at the age of 17 because they didn't want to drive me around anymore. Local transport links aren't good enough. Buses don't run regularly or late enough for young people to rely on them, to play sport, go to college, see friends or visit local town centres at weekends. By 17, many of my constituents want to be able to drive to school without having to rely on their parents. Unfortunately, that also means my constituency has far too many tragic accidents with young drivers. In 2000, 4 teenagers died after Adam, a 17-year-old newly qualified driver, crashed his car. Adam, Jonathan, Craig and James were planning to celebrate one of their friends' birthdays just a few hours after Adam crashed. An inquest found that defects in the vehicle's condition, tyre pressure imbalance and a comparative lack of driving experience was a contributing factor to Adam's crash. In 2017, Trudy May Kennell, Ryan Barber and Will Louch died on a journey back from Snowdonia to Atherstone, and another unnamed 18-year-old was arrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving. And most recently, in 2024, a teenage boy suffered serious head injuries after his car hit a tree and caught fire in Polesworth. It was reported to be miraculous that he managed to survive the crash. All of these young people had so much ahead of them, and it's so sad to see their crashes as belonging to a pattern. I know that there's so much discussion about what policies to propose to tackle this issue, but I think the first one we must have to push for is for our young children or young people to wear a seatbelt. Between 2019 and 2023, 16% of younger car drivers involved in serious collisions did not wear seatbelts. We need to make sure our young people know if they don't feel confident driving with passengers, they don't do it. We need to ensure that before passing a driving test, young people have experience of driving in the dark and with passengers. And we need to make sure as adults that we challenge risky driving behaviour whenever we see it.
John Mill. John Milne.
Thank you, Mr Desmond, and I thank the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury for bringing this important debate. Just a few weeks after my election in Horsham, I received a letter from Jane, my constituent. Jane is a mother who has had to endure the unthinkable pain of burying her 17-year-old son. Will died in a collision in June. He was a smart and popular young man with a passion for judo, maths and computers, and my heart goes out to Jane and her family. Jane's son had passed his test just 1 month prior to his death. She told me, "As a mother, I did everything I could to protect him. I persuaded my son not to drive with his friends in his car for the first month. I felt I could not request this for longer when his friends didn't have such rules and it wasn't law." And I remember myself when I passed my test and first went out with a group of teenage friends, how intimidating that was. So why hasn't the UK taken action already? Under the coalition government, potential adoption of graduated driving licences was discussed, but various issues arose. One problem was the impact on less affluent young people, who may be more adversely impacted by restricted driving hours. How, for example, are working 17-year-olds who need a car, who need a car access to work at night, or for an early hours shift work. How are young people who rely on carpooling to cut transport costs able to do so if there are passenger limitations? So there are obstacles, particularly in rural areas such as the village in my constituency of Horsham. So today I support my honourable colleague from Shrewsbury and my constituent Jane by joining their call for the government to take action. We need to make the right choice. So I think we should see an impact assessment of the various graduated driving schemes, many of which are already in operation around the world, so we can make the right choice for the 60% of the public who, as polls suggest, already support this. And finally, I'd like to thank Jane for bringing her heartbreaking story to me. It can't be easy to campaign on a wound so recent. And I'd like Jane to know that it is only because of individuals like her that we are able to have this debate today, and perhaps because of them, change will come.
Rachel Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr Desmond. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I would wholeheartedly congratulate and commiserate with the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury about the distressing tale that she has had to tell and that the parents have had to bear. In constituencies like mine, Tiverton and Minehead, getting a car can often be the only way young people get to meet their friends without relying on the taxi service of mum and dad. It's integral to growing their sense of independence and self-sufficiency. Rural areas like mine are not blessed with a good public transport system, so cars are the predominant means of transport, whether it's for business or leisure. In Tiverton and Minehead, where we have almost no sixth form provision, young people often need to get a car to get to their place of learning. When the buses are overcrowded, sometimes late, and journeys always long, these cars can be a powerful vehicle, literally, of academic and vocational aspiration. Nationally, government figures estimate that 1 in 5 young drivers will crash within a year of passing their test, and that more than 1,500 young drivers are killed or seriously injured on this country's roads in each year. In Tiverton and Minehead, over the last 5 years, there were 244 total casualties and accidents where at least one participant, not including pedestrians, was under the age of 26. Of those, 35 were serious and 3 were fatal. The government must support measures to reduce the number of tragedies caused by road traffic accidents, including investment in road safety infrastructure and maintenance, better enforcement on speeding and law breaking, education programmes and better safety technology in the modern industry. To conclude, I would admit that I do not have the solutions here, but I have faith that we as a Parliament, and more widely in a national conversation, can really move the dial on this issue. We can find a way to protect our young people without blocking them from cars that can provide a route to community for them. We owe it to our young people to do that, and to all those affected by road collisions. And I know we can rise to the challenge that this poses.
Chris Finns.
Thank you, It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship. And before I start, let me thank my honourable friend from Shrewsbury for her incredibly moving story, and particularly her story about Harvey. And I think everyone in this chamber today's heart will go out to Harvey's family for what must have been an absolutely terrible ordeal. Sadly, you don't have to go far in my constituency of Harlow to see signs of a road traffic incident. A damaged traffic island, a crushed crash barrier, a single bunch of flowers or a football scarf tied to a lamppost. I would also like to agree with my honourable friend from Shrewsbury about the issues on rural roads. Like the previous speaker, my constituency is made up of Harlow, which obviously is very urban, and rural areas like Roydon. And I've already met with the Roydon Speedwatch team to talk about the issues that they face. And I'll go into some of my suggestions as to how we can solve those if I have time. In 2022, Mr Chairman, there were 228 casualties in Harlow in total, 2 of which were fatalities and 51 were life-changing serious injuries. There have been over 1,000 incidents since 2018. I recognise I don't have a lot of time, but I did want to briefly mention the 2 young gentlemen that I had the pleasure to teach that I mentioned in the chamber a few weeks ago. The impact of losing someone so young is huge for those families, but also for everyone that knows them and that cares about them. I know later in the week there will be a debate about road safety around schools, which I look forward to taking part in, but I agree with the honourable member who spoke earlier about the importance of education. And I'd like to finish just briefly by mentioning my little pet peeve, I suppose, and I'm sure many campaigners in the room will agree with me, that when you raise an issue of road safety with the relevant authority, it takes so long to actually get the necessary road safety implements in place. And I would really ask the Minister to give that some consideration. Thank you, Sir Desmond.
I'm afraid I must reduce it to a formal 2-minute limit, and I call Sarah Russell.
Thank you, Sir Desmond. And thank you to my friend, the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury, for bringing this debate. The last thing we want is to parade our grief, but we need people to understand the devastation these road deaths cause. These are the words of my constituents Mark and Mandy Ogden, whose daughter Georgia Ogden died on the 26th of June 2020. Georgia, known as G to her family, was 17. She'd been out for the evening. She was in a car with another teenage passenger driven by a 3rd teenage girl. They were all wearing their seatbelts. Mandy talks about the pain of 4 years now without hearing G's voice, her cute laugh, her silliness and random outbursts of singing, her tantrums over something and nothing, her sassiness, her incredible dancing and performing. She speaks of a gaping hole at the loss of her daughter, at the loneliness and the emptiness which she's left. It's indescribable. She told me of the knock at the door, the immediate realisation of what had happened, that the day that G was killed will haunt her for the rest of her days. Sadly, there are several tributes on A-roads around my constituency to other young people who have been killed in surprisingly similar circumstances. Roads in our area are dark, fast and dangerous. We can't change the entire rural road network, certainly not in the short term. We can change the law, though. Mark and Mandy are now part of the campaign group alluded to by previous speakers, the Forget-Me-Not Families Uniting, who are calling on us to save young lives through the introduction of graduated driving licensing and the creation of an expert panel to advise the government on how graduated driving licensing in the UK should look. The Department for Transport's 2019 road safety statement noted that there is evidence to suggest that graduated driving licensing schemes, where they have been introduced elsewhere, have proved very effective at improving the safety of young drivers. For example, in California, where drivers aged under 18 cannot take passengers under 20 unless supervised, and in New Zealand, where young and newly qualified drivers go onto a restricted licence, which means they cannot
Jim
drive...
Shannon. Order. Jim Shannon.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Can I first of all thank the Honourable Lady for Shrewsbury for setting the scene and convey my sympathies to the families in the gallery today for the loss of their young ones. Very sorry to hear of the horrific accident that occurred in North Wales where 4 young boys died. And I'm very concerned to put forward some of the issues that we can for Northern Ireland. Due to lack of experience, young people are more at risk of being in accidents and addressing these challenges, and that requires a combination of legislative action and educational awareness. So that's my two things I want to speak of in a very short time. In 2019, young people aged 16 to 24 accounted for almost 21% of those killed or seriously injured in road traffic collisions in Northern Ireland. One thing that young drivers are taught, Mr. Chairman, is to expect the unexpected and remain cautious on the road. And there have been conversations in Northern Ireland regarding enhanced learning education, and it would in fact benefit young people to take further driving training after they have passed their tests. That's one of the things we're looking at. What's the challenges on the roads for young people? It's peer pressure, it's drug and alcohol use, it's mobile phone use, and sometimes it's just pure unfortunate road accidents. The use of mobile phones whilst driving can cause excessive speeding, lack of concentration, ultimately distraction, leading to increased likelihood of a crash or collision. And there has to be the issue for young voters as well on travelling late at night. That was one of the things I think government in the past term was prepared to look at, and also excessive speed. To conclude, Mr. Chairman, there's much more that can be done, especially within our schools, and that's my key issue, key ask to the Minister, to teach young people the importance of road safety. Once people hit 17 and are able to start driving, the freedom is immense. And there's a role to be played to remind them of the importance of being cautious on the roads, because we can be faced with complex, dangerous situations every day. So I look very much forward to hearing the Minister and the Shadow Minister as well, and their commitment to young people and ensuring that our road safety legislation is as tight as possible.
Order. Bio Alba.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my honourable friend, the Member of Parliament for Shrewsbury, for securing this very important debate and sharing the tragic loss of young Harvey. Ahead of this debate, I met with Gillian and John McGrath, constituents of mine in South and Eastern Roxford, whose daughter was tragically killed in March 2009 by a newly qualified driver. Eleanor Grace McGrath was hit by a 17-year-old driver who was showing off to his friends when he struck the crowd of children. 14 of the children at the scene experienced severe injuries. But sadly, the story and the loss of Eleanor Grace is not unique. Following Eleanor's death, two of her closest friends and Gillian and John set up the campaign Driving with Grace. The Driving with Grace campaign produced a documentary to educate our young people about the devastating impact of road collisions. The Driving with Grace campaign has been shown to young people across Essex and has had a significant impact. I welcome the announcement of the new National Road Safety Strategy, and I would like to ask the Minister in the next steps of the National Road Safety Strategy to consider a P-plate system. This is a key recommendation from the Driving with Grace campaign. It would mean that new drivers must wear a P-plate for the first year after passing their test. This would encourage drivers to effectively give them space, and it will also mean that the new driver would not necessarily, in some cases, show off. As a parent, I understand the constant conflict of granting young people the freedom they deserve, coupled with the constant worry of keeping them safe. Tragedies like the loss of Eleanor Grace are far too common. Moving forward, we have to make changes. Thank you to my honourable friend for securing this debate, and I'm sure all members present today will join me to commend them forward. Thank you.
Josh Dean.
Thank you, Sir Desmond, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for Shrewsbury for securing this important debate, and I want to put on record the story of Sonny Crane, whose family live in my constituency, Hertford and Stortford, and whose mother Naomi is here in Westminster Hall today. Just over 3 years ago, Sonny was tragically killed in a road traffic accident, and the impact on Sonny's family since his loss has been simply devastating. I was struck by his mother's words when we first met. He went out that day, a young 19-year-old boy going to enjoy Topgolf with his friends, never to return. Across the country, there are far too many similar cases like Sonny's. We know that crashes are more likely to happen when young drivers are carrying friends in the car at night time and when driving conditions are difficult. But it doesn't need to be this way. Any death on the road is one too many. I am therefore confident that the Minister appreciates the seriousness of this issue and the need for action. I would be grateful if the Minister could look into best practices on young driver safety used in other countries and seek to incorporate these in its road safety strategy. And additionally, I'd be grateful if the Minister could detail in her response how the Government is supporting local leaders and communities to make our roads safer, particularly in semi-rural constituencies like mine. Naomi has told me that Sonny's favourite phrase was, "I'm here for a good time, not a long time." Tragically, Sonny was not with us for a long time, but I know that he is lovingly remembered by his mother, who I know describes him as Sonny by name, Sonny by nature, and we can honour his memory by working to ensure that no young person is taken too soon because of a road traffic accident. Thank you.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Sir Desmond, and can I say it's a pleasure to serve under you today, and I want to congratulate, along with others, my honourable friend from Shrewsbury for securing the time for this debate today, and also for reading Crystal's testimony. It was incredibly moving. This, of course, is a very timely debate because the road safety strategy is currently under development. And just like this discussion today, I hope that strategy takes the approach that we should never see deaths or serious accidents on our roads as an acceptable consequence of the perceived freedoms that car ownership can bring. And I do feel that there's, when it comes to young drivers in particular, but I think all drivers when it comes to learning, there's a focus on passing the test rather than learning how to drive. And I think that's why the graduated approach to learning to drive is so important, because it slows things down and it forces those who want to drive to focus on learning. Globally, the graduated driving licences do work. In New Zealand, they've reduced accidents for people between 15 and 19 by 23%, and those between 20 and 24 by 20%. This is quite incredible. And of course, that's within the context, as has been repeated here today, that 1 in 5 new drivers will crash in their first year. An absolutely incredible statistic, if we're honest with ourselves. There will be arguments against this approach, but it should never be the case that the implementation of a graduated driver licence is framed within that argument about restricting the liberty of young people. Because I believe that poor public transport should never be an excuse for exposing our young people to danger. So I know action in this area will be difficult, but I really do hope the road safety strategy presents us with an opportunity for doing something. Thank you, Sir Desmond.
Jenny Riddle-Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. May I start by warmly congratulating my good and honourable friend, the member for Shrewsbury, for securing this important debate, and indeed all stories that have been shared this morning. In Suffolk Coastal, we are proudly rural, with A and B roads stretching the full 40 miles of the constituency. I could use my speech today to tell you in great detail about the danger of rural roads, but I believe that everyone's done that well, and with just 2 minutes, I'll resist that urge. Instead, I'd like to throw my weight behind the call that we've heard this morning for graduated licence scheme. In places like Suffolk, it's incredibly severe, and rural roads, we've heard, give it some impetus in the need for that. 38% of collisions in Suffolk were a result of somebody, a young driver, behind the wheel. So this problem is real. Now, a graduated driving licence scheme, as we've heard, would put on a set of restrictions to new drivers who've recently passed that practical test for an initial period. Now, some of these instructions are important for us to properly debate and give real consideration to. And as we've just heard, not everyone will be in agreement, but we have to accept that we need to do more to challenge these horrific statistics and do more to make sure that lives are saved going forward. Now, I won't take up any more time, but may I just personally thank everybody that has come in today and has shared their personal stories. They've been hugely touching, and I know that, as the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury said at the beginning, you put your grief on the line to share these stories, and we're deeply moved by it, so thank you so much.
Paulette Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank the member for Shrewsbury for securing this really important important debate. Road safety isn't just a policy issue, it's a matter of life and death, one that affects all our communities, including mine in Birmingham, Erdington. Last October, a young driver in Erdington lost control and collided with a tree on Tyburn Road, resulting in one fatality and life-changing injuries for the other. Only weeks ago, near Castlevale, a driver and passenger fled the scene after a serious accident, leaving another young man hospitalised. And just last night, a railway bridge, which I've talked about before, was hit again, leaving trains cancelled in the area. These incidents highlight the urgent need for action. Chair, every day 5 lives are lost on UK roads. That means 5 people die, 5 families are affected, and 5 entire communities that are forever changed every single day due to a failure in road safety. And for young drivers, road crashes are the leading cause of death. This shocking reality demands immediate action. There are many reasons for this. Some of the pitfalls for early adulthood are that we are overconfident, we are inexperienced, and we like to take risks. In the West Midlands, what we've done is the West Midlands has appointed 2 commissioners to advise on road safety. My hope is that finally we will start to treat these issues with the urgency they demand, because we cannot wait for another tragedy to drive action. So let us honour the memories of those who we've lost by making our roads safer now. Thank you, Chair.
Dr. Peter Prinsley.
Yeah. Thank you, Sir Desmond. Once you've passed your driving test in this country, you're simply released onto the roads. This new Parliament must act to change this. On Boxing Day 2017, a 17-year-old from Suffolk crashed his Ford Fiesta, his first car. His friends William Smedley, Kate Paxton, just 18 years old, both from Bury St Edmunds, died. Men who have recently learned to drive are at high risk of accidents. Graduated driver's licences have been adopted in the United States, in Canada, New Zealand, Sweden and Australia. This works so well at reducing accidents that it's expanding all over the place, with states progressively adopting stricter rules. From December last year, Western Australia, which previously had the most lenient system of licensing in the country, placed limits that had been placed on a number of passengers that someone could carry. This is known as Tom's Law, in reference to Tom Safiotti, a 15-year-old boy who died in a crash while a passenger in a car driven by a new driver. In the UK, drivers can display a P plate after passing the test, but these come with no additional rules. So let's graduate the licence for drivers here in the UK. This is not the nanny state, this is simply good government, and we all seem to be agreed in this room. So let's simply make this happen. Thank you.
Just.
Thank you, Sir Desmond. It's a pleasure to be serving under your chairship, and I wish to thank my honourable friend from Shrewsbury for such an eloquent and emotional speech. The issue being discussed today is not a new one. Many, many years ago, when I attended a school reunion, I was told of 2 of my schoolmates who died in road traffic accidents at a very young age, one of whom was on his way to see his son. Young lives lost, families devastated. Young male car drivers are 4 times as likely to be killed or seriously injured compared with all other car drivers aged 25 or over. We have already discussed the prospect of having a graduate driving licence, and there is precedent for such a licence in countries that have already been mentioned. We can have a 2-year period of probation with end plates. We can have lower drink-drive limits, and we can also monitor that young drivers do not drive late at night. There are other measures that we can also take, Sir Desmond. For example, we can have limits on engine sizes to reduce the driving of powerful vehicles and make the use of P-plate mandatory for a set period after passing the test. Sir Desmond, young drivers make up for just over 5% of those who have a UK full driving licence, but they are 20% of young drivers are involved in fatal or serious collisions in which they are the driver. Although the graduate driving licence idea was rejected by the Department for Transport back in 2020, it's time to reconsider that. Young drivers have all of their lives in front of them to drive as many cars as they want. So let's help them to do this without being killed and without killing others in the process.
John Slinger.
I don't want to rehearse the points that have been made so eloquently by my colleagues from across this chamber. I merely want to say that education has been mentioned briefly, and given that almost all road collisions and therefore deaths and serious injuries are preventable, I hope that the Minister will do everything that she can as she considers the road safety strategy to make sure that all available resources are given to local authorities, to police and crime commissioners, to police forces, to go into schools and to reach our young people. And I would just mention that Warwickshire County Council has a Safe and Active Schools programme that looks at primary school age groups, also the journey for secondary schools. The Police and Crime Commissioner has a focus on young people in his road safety strategy. Every effort must be made to make an impression upon impressionable young minds from as early as possible so that we can reduce the risk of these tragic deaths from happening.
Claire Hughes.
Thank you, Sir Desmond, and it's an honour to serve under your chairmanship. And can I thank my honourable friend, the member for Shrewsbury, for bringing this really important debate today, and specifically for mentioning the issues regarding road safety on rural roads. Nowhere is the devastating impact of such cases better exemplified than Olivia's story. Olivia Alkir, a much-loved 17-year-old, was denied her bright future when she was killed in the passenger seat of a friend's car. The driver had been racing on another rural road when he lost control and crashed head-on into an approaching vehicle at 80 miles an hour. Sir Desmond, he had only passed his test the day before. Olivia's tragic death in 2019 devastated her family, of course, but also the wider community of Ebenechted near Ruthin. Olivia's mother, Jo, is determined that her daughter's story will go on and save lives, and I'm sure that it already has, because Olivia's family decided to work with North Wales Police and create a hard-hitting film designed to warn other young people of the dangers of reckless driving. Olivia's story has been shown to learners in schools all across Wales and indeed in this House, thanks to the work of my predecessor, the Honourable Member for what was then Clwyd South. Olivia's story brings into sharp focus the need for action. I welcome the new government's road safety review, and I implore the Minister to leave no stone unturned in her mission to improve road safety for young people, to learn from other countries, to listen to campaigners like Crystal Owen, and to consider the use of emerging technologies, things like AI and telematics are developing all the time. So thank you. I look forward to hearing your remarks, Minister, and to further action in the coming months.
Alison Bennett for the Lib Dems.
Thank you, Sir Desmond, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. And I would like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury for bringing a really important debate to this place today, and to thank Crystal for sharing her heartbreaking testimony. I'm now old enough to have been driving for 30 years, and during the debate I've been reflecting on the joy of passing my test when I was 17. I grew up in Gloucestershire, and to pass my test and to be able to travel around the county, meeting friends in Gloucester, in Stroud, in Tewkesbury, truly was a liberation. How lucky we were. But less lucky were two of my classmates, Paul Torrington and Lee Mortimer, who a few years after leaving school were both killed separately in road traffic accidents. And I reflect today on the opportunities I've had in those 30 years that they have missed out upon. Between 2004 and 2023, fatalities involving younger drivers decreased by 60%, a true testament to the effectiveness of education, awareness, and the tireless efforts of campaigners. Despite this, road traffic accidents claimed the lives of 1,624 people across the UK last year. So, there is clearly still work to do. Young drivers, as we have heard, especially young men aged between 17 and 25, are overrepresented in those statistics. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. May I simply just express my sadness and join others in commemorating constituents lost. I'd like to name Sammy Phillips and Lewis Mogul, who died in Bix, actually just metres from where I lived at the time. As a father, I can express sympathy, but never really truly understand such pain. Others have spoken of rural roads and the particular hazards that drivers face on those, including the darkness, narrow roads, higher speed limits and other dangers. Would my honourable friend agree that looking at the dangers specifically on rural roads would be a helpful thing to do?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention and absolutely agree that, as we've heard from a number of members this morning, the risks of rural roads are particularly profound. So we need to find ways to protect people on rural roads and all other people who share those roads with drivers. And today we've had the chance to reflect on the tragic deaths of Hugo, Harvey, Wilf and Jevon. We're also here to remember every other one of those 1,625 people who lost their lives on British roads last year, and the countless more in years gone by. In my own constituency of Mid Sussex, I recently met Marie, who lost her 22-year-old son in December 2014 to a road traffic accident. He was a backseat driver in a car being driven by a newly qualified driver who was 21. Sorry, he's a backseat passenger, I should say. He was driving in excess of 100 miles an hour on a country lane when he lost control. The car landed on its roof and the 2 passengers in the back lost their lives. Marie's son left behind 2 young boys, one who was 8 months old and the other was 5 years old at the time. And as we've heard, we can and must learn from these terrible events. With our remarkable progress in reducing road fatalities over the past few decades, the UK now boasts one of the lowest road death rates per million people in Europe. But every death is one too many, and we must use this improvement as inspiration that better is possible, and change does save lives, not as a reason to sit on our laurels and say job well done. My Liberal Democrat colleagues and I are firm in our belief that we need the government to publish a road safety strategy without delay. Such strategies have previously delivered significant improvements in road safety. For instance, the Road Safety Observatory, the RSO, have noted a significant decline in road fatalities since the 1990s, thanks to the 2000 Road Safety Strategy. A strategy which delivered campaigns like Think, infrastructure improvements and more rigorous driving tests. Introducing an updated strategy now would surely be transformative in further reducing accidents and saving lives. And crucially, the strategy would need to focus heavily on rural areas where 60% of fatal collisions occur. We have seen success with the introduction of measures like stricter drink driving laws, seatbelt legislation and tougher driving tests. But what we absolutely must do is improve public transport options to reduce our reliance on cars. Young people, particularly those in rural areas, should not have to rely on dangerous journeys to get to work, education, or to see friends. And yet the sharp decline in bus services under the previous government, coupled with rising fares, has made it harder for many young people to get around safely. In West Sussex, for example, we've seen a nearly 20% drop in available passenger journeys since 2015. Young people are simply so much more likely to end up driving when there aren't decent alternatives. We can solve this by maintaining the £2 cap on bus fares, reopening smaller train stations and offering on-demand services where conventional buses are not viable. Rural roads would also benefit greatly from better infrastructure, such as the installation of more overtaking lanes, as the RSO has suggested. As well as broader infrastructure strategies, we must embrace new ideas. One of the standout proposals today is, of course, Harvey's Hammer. Harvey's Hammer could be a game changer in saving lives and creating a more safety-conscious culture, especially amongst young drivers. New technology, coupled with better enforcement of speed limits, education programmes for all road users, and investment in safer roads and vehicles, all of which have a proven track record of success, provide hope that we can do so much more in the years to come.
My Liberal Democrat colleagues and I have long championed road safety measures, and we will continue to do so. Marie, her son's young family, and the families of Hugo, Harvey, Wilf and Jevon are in our hearts as we strive for effective change. The government must support measures to make these tragedies a rarity, and proposals like Harvey's Hammer, which have the potential to save lives on the occasion these terrible events still take place. As Right Honourable members have already set out today, we know that young people face disproportionate risks on the roads, but they should not be punished for it. Instead, we must give them the tools to stay safe. Let's focus on improving public infrastructure, enforcing road safety rules and providing better public transport options using a new road safety strategy. We owe it to the memory of all young people whose lives have been cut short, to their families and to all who care about saving innocent lives. Thank you.
Greg Smith for the opposition.
Thank you, Sir Desmond. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I congratulate the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury for bringing this important debate to Westminster Hall this morning, and all those who have contributed with powerful speeches. My heart goes out to any family who have lost a child or any relative in a road accident. Every single death is a tragedy. Every single death should spur us on to do more to prevent future deaths, to prevent future injuries, and to make our roads safer. I cannot imagine the pain of any family getting that knock on the door from a police officer, or however the news is broken to them, to tell them that a child has died under any circumstances, in this case, on our roads. But as we look at the options available to us, the practical measures that can be taken to improve road safety, I think we do always have to look at it through the lens that to drive is freedom. To drive brings opportunity. For many, to drive, and I include myself in that, brings pleasure. And so I repeat, Sir Desmond, our challenge is what will protect those freedoms, what will protect those opportunities, what will protect those pleasures in a safer way. I will.
Mandy often said to me, often the main argument against this change to driver licensing is that it restricts freedom, but our daughter's freedom has been taken away forever. Does the honourable gentleman agree that that is an important point too?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention. I will come on in a few moments to explain the measures I think that would be far better to protect the freedom to drive as well as the safety of those that do so, that perhaps won't agree with every single point that Honourable and Right Honourable members have made in this debate. But I repeat my point that central to the way that I would like to look at this issue is not how do you restrict people more, but how you make people safer in the first place in order to have the skills required to drive safely, be it in our cities, in our towns, on our rural roads, on our motorways, or indeed abroad, where often the rules can be very different. We all know the example of the German autobahns, many of which have no speed limit. And I think it is vital for any British citizen going to Germany that we should equip them with the ability to handle a car at very great speed, to be safe on those roads. So I repeat, Sir Desmond, the challenge before us is how we make everybody, young people for sure, old people, as one honourable member made the point as well, where the statistics are just as stark for some of our older drivers as they are for younger drivers, that much more safer to be able to handle a vehicle in all conditions on our roads. I will.
And thank the gentleman for giving way. Back in 2020, there was an older driver which caused a fatality in Edinburgh for a 3-year-old boy. The fatal accident inquiry found that perhaps drivers over 80 should be subject to cognitive tests if they want to continue driving. That inquiry is currently with the DVLA. Will you support action in that area? Sorry, will the honourable gentleman support action in that area?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his intervention there. I think it is important that we look at all evidence that suggests where there is a problem to be solved and explore the basis for how you solve that problem. I am no fan of knee-jerk legislation. I think this House is at its worst when we jump to knee-jerk solutions to any problem presented. It is important to look at all the evidence and all the practical outcomes and potential unintended consequences, but the case he raises is an important one, the point he makes is an important one, and it should certainly be looked at, as it is, as he references, being looked at by the DVLA at the moment. And I'd be interested to hear the Minister's response to that point. I think it is important, bearing in mind, and I double underline the point, bearing in mind that every death on our roads is a tragedy. There has been some significant improvement in road safety over recent years. I will just expand this point, then I will give way to the Honourable Lady. Since road user casualties peaked in 1965 with nearly 8,000 deaths, there has been a concerted effort to reduce those numbers. Thankfully, this effort has largely been successful across successive governments of all political persuasions. According to the Department for Transport's own figures released in September last year, Great Britain ranked third out of 33 countries reported on in 2023 for the lowest number of road fatalities per million of the population. Of course, that number is still too high, but the direction of travel is, of course, a positive one, and we need to take further action. I'd promised to give way to the Honourable Lady first earlier. I will just finish this point then. Mindful of time, I may take one or two more interventions. Now, while the claim of a 13% fall in casualties accurately reflects the raw data between 2010 and 2023, it fails to account for the context of vehicle miles, which have actually significantly increased in that time period. During that time, the number of vehicle miles increased from 306 billion to 334 billion. When adjusted to this context, the Department's own data indicates a decrease in the casualty rate from 681 casualties per billion vehicle miles in 2010 to 398 in 2023, which is a 41% reduction. I repeat, we still have to take action to get that number down to zero, but the direction of travel has been a good one. If the Honourable Lady still wants to, I will give way.
Thank you very much for giving way. You mentioned, the Honourable Member mentions the kind of personal tragedies that have happened as a result of road accidents, and also talks about members of all political persuasions. I wonder whether he might agree with me that it's brilliant to see such cross-party support for these campaigns in this room, but it might be more helpful for campaigners that are here today if His Majesty's opposition were also a little bit better represented in this debate.
I hesitate, Sir Desmond, to go there on a political point, but when we are having a serious debate, I'm not sure comments like that are necessarily helpful in the spirit of trying to engender cross-party working on a point like this. So this is actually a subject I have some history in looking at, indeed, with the now Minister for the Future of Roads. The Transport Select Committee in the previous Parliament, which I sat on at that time, as did the Minister, did a deep inquiry into novice and young drivers and the safety implications of that. And within that, we looked very carefully at graduated driver licences, amongst other things, such as the Under-17s Car Club that was referenced in the debate earlier, which I'm a huge fan of. I'm a huge fan of trying to get young people, potentially very young people, in an off-road, safe, private land setting to start to understand how to safely control a vehicle, to drive a vehicle, to do various... I didn't even... yes, I will.
Very briefly, I didn't manage to express it in my own speech, but the figure of 1 in 5 young people that will be involved in a reportable road traffic collision in the year following their test, that is reduced to 1 in 33 for those who complete that course. Will I invite him to agree?
Yeah, I thank the honourable gentleman for that point. I entirely agree with him. The younger you can get somebody into any sort of powered vehicle and start to learn how to control it safely in all sorts of different conditions in that safe, off-road, heavily supervised setting is all to the good and the powerful. And I was certainly very impressed from the evidence I heard in that Select Committee inquiry back then. But it raises that wider point, which I invite the Minister to reflect on when she sums up this debate. And actually, it was a point that I thought was encapsulated by the line given by the Honourable Gentleman for Edinburgh South West when he said young people are focused on passing a test rather than learning to drive. And as I look back and reflect on the testing system and the learning system that we've got, it is too much focused on a certain very limited set of circumstances in which any individual seeking to get their first driving licence has to go through. Very often in testing in an urban environment, certainly very rarely testing on the rural roads we have heard so much about. Never, as we know from learner drivers, going on a motorway and learning to control a car at potentially significant speeds. So my challenge to the Minister when she sums up this is how can we actually ensure that the point at which any young person, or any person for that matter, is granted their pass certificate and goes and gets their full driving licence, they are properly equipped. To me, it is not putting in a graduated system afterwards. It is having the confidence when that licence is issued that everybody is able and safe to the best of anyone's possible ability to control any motor vehicle, because graduated driver licences would take away too much from young people. We heard from young people in that Select Committee inquiry that I spoke about. Well, what if they want to go into the world of work? What if they want to do night shifts, but they're told they can't drive at night? What if they wish to go into one of the emergency services and have to attend nighttime emergencies, be that as a police officer? I think I'm very limited on time, but I'm happy to take up this debate afterwards. What if that young person wants to go into some sort of path that needs them to be able to drive a car at night? There has to be an answer for these things. And I would say, Sir Desmond, very gently to all honourable members in Westminster Hall this morning and to the Minister, the challenge must surely be that a driving licence must be equal for everybody. The test, the thing that we must look at the most is how can we actually improve our confidence that everybody getting issued with a driving licence can control a vehicle in all circumstances, in all conditions, on all road types, which will involve very significant change so that road safety can be improved for absolutely everybody.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Sir Desmond. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair this morning, and I'd like to begin by congratulating my honourable friend on securing this debate and thank her for continuing to raise the vitally important issue of road safety. It's clear from the number of honourable members here today, I think I counted 26 contributions, and I may have been wrong, that this is rightly an issue of huge public concern, and I thank all those who've made very moving and compelling contributions. I also congratulate my honourable friend for championing the excellent work her constituent, Crystal Owen, is doing to highlight young driver safety following the tragic death of her son, Harvey. In recent months, I've been grateful to have the opportunity to meet with my honourable friend and Crystal and with other members of Forget Me Not Families Uniting, including Sharon Huddleston and Dr Ian Greenwood, both of them I know are here today, and with a number of other families whose lives have been affected by road death. I know that Crystal, Ian, Sharon and many other families are in the public gallery today, and my heart goes out to all of them. I want to thank them for taking the time to meet with me, for their courage in sharing their heartbreaking stories, either with me or with their constituency MPs, and for their determination to make sure that other families do not face the same grief. It is vital that victims' voices are heard and their experiences shared, as have been so movingly today. I am committed to continuing to engage as we develop our policies in this area. Now, I'm sure that many of us remember reading about the deaths of Harvey Owen, Wilfred Fitchett, Jevon Hurst and Hugo Morris in November 2023. And no one could fail to be moved hearing that terrible story again today in Crystal's own words. It is literally every parent's worst nightmare. And I know that the deaths of these 4 young men had devastating impact not only on their families and their community, as have the deaths of the young people we've spoken about today. I am determined that we take action to prevent such deaths in the future, and improving road safety is one of my department's highest priorities. Now, despite the 2-year probation period for all new drivers introduced in 1995, as we've heard today, in terms of population and the number of miles driven, 17 to 24-year-olds, particularly young men, remain one of the highest fatality risk groups, both as car drivers and passengers. Whilst the latest statistics show that the number of young drivers killed on our roads has fallen by 80% since 1990, this cannot be a reason for complacency. 90 deaths, which was the number in 2023, is 90 too many. Every one of those young lives lost leaves a devastated family, or often many families, including those of passengers and other road users, and there is a pressing need for action. Whilst we are not considering graduated driving licences, we absolutely recognise that young people are disproportionately victims of tragic collisions on our roads, and that is why we are exploring options to tackle the root causes of this without unfairly penalising young drivers. This government wants to ensure young people's access to employment, education and other opportunities, whilst also keeping them safe on the roads. As my honourable friend and other honourable members, particularly those representing rural and semi-rural areas, have said, that means giving them more choices by investing in public transport and active travel. And this government has already begun to do that with additional funding for buses, for walking and cycling announced in the budget. But of course that goes alongside specific road safety measures. Now, one piece of work which supports these efforts is Driver 2020, the department's largest young driver research project, an evaluation of a range of interventions to improve the safety of young drivers. The project tested the effectiveness of 5 non-legislative measures aimed at improving safety for young and novice drivers, including keeping a logbook, extra hazard perception training, classroom-based education, mentoring agreements and telematics. Driver 2020 began in January 2019 and over 28,000 participants were recruited. Now, the project was delayed by the pandemic, but the department has now received the final report, and this will then help inform our considerations as we move forward. We can, as a number of honourable members have also referenced, look to international experience. For example, a number of countries have a lower or zero alcohol limit for young drivers, or a minimum learning period. I would also like to highlight our Think campaign, which does important work to encourage safer attitudes and behaviours amongst younger drivers. Think's innovative campaigns are highly targeted to reach young men aged 17 to 24. People sometimes tell me I don't feel like I have seen some of these campaigns, and perhaps that's there because they're not on the channels for those people who we're most keen to see them. Now, honourable members will be pleased to hear that we've just launched the latest phase of our speeding campaign, which highlights the risks of driving too fast for the conditions on rural roads. circumstances that we know and members have referenced today contribute to high numbers of young driver casualties. A number of honourable members also talked about action to reduce speed, including lower speed limits, and to enforce speed limits, such as speed cameras, which of course are an enforcement tool. Now, changing our roads, changing speed limits, installing speed cameras are decisions for local traffic authorities. Obviously, they want to make those decisions in consultation with their local communities and working with local police. They know their roads best, rather than me trying to dictate to them from Whitehall. Indeed, I wouldn't be able to. But I do agree that such partnerships are absolutely essential, that they should be looking at a local level at interventions to make our roads safer. And as a department, we will look at what more we can do to support them, and we stand ready to work with all those working at local level. Now, think campaigns have shown positive results, but we know that changing ingrained attitudes and behaviours take time. This year, we're doing even more to land the vital messages, including working with content creators and influential platforms like Lad Bible to tackle speeding via the voices that our young audience trust. Before Christmas, Think also launched a major new drink driving campaign. This highlighted the risks of losing your licence after drinking even a little before driving, and the subsequent impact on the freedoms that we know mean a lot to young drivers. And as a number of honourable members have said today, we also need to address other dangerous behaviours, including failing to wear a seatbelt, using a mobile phone whilst driving, and taking drugs before driving, which sadly I think is a growing problem. And we need to use every opportunity to educate young people about road safety. And that involves working with our mayors, with our local councils, with police and crime commissioners, with police, with schools, colleges, charities, and indeed the many parents or families who have generously used their tragic experience to try to help others make better choices. The Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency also delivers a wide range of support targeted at keeping young drivers safe. The Ready to Pass campaign helps learner drivers assess when they're ready to take their test and provides lots of useful information about safe driving for life. And many people have talked about the importance of experiencing different road conditions, including driving on rural roads, driving at night and in the dark. And Pass Plus provides further education for drivers once they've passed their tests. It's clear to me that we should consider what more can be done to support learner drivers and newly qualified drivers to be safe. Now, I return to my honourable friend who raised the potential of measures to improve vehicle safety, for example, by installing a Harvey's Hammer device. And I'll take that suggestion back to my officials for further consideration, and I will write to her. In my short time as Future of Roads Minister, I've heard too many heartbreaking accounts of loss and serious injury. I know we've also been very moved to hear the stories during this debate of honourable members' constituents who have lost loved ones. I'd again like to thank all those members who've come here today to share them. As I say, it is vital that we hear the voices of those who've been most impacted by road deaths, and I can assure them that I am listening. Sir Desmond, I want to assure everyone listening, but especially those who are who've been affected by road deaths and injuries, that this government treats road safety with the utmost seriousness. We are committed to reducing the numbers of those killed and seriously injured on our roads. As my honourable friend for Edinburgh South West said, we can never regard road deaths as inevitable. The majority of road crashes are avoidable. And that is why the department is developing our road safety strategy. It will be the first in over a decade, and we will set out more details in due course. But we will adopt a safe system approach. We need all partners working together, policymakers, road engineers and designers, vehicle manufacturers, police and road users. And I'll be very pleased to keep in touch with my honourable friend for Shrewsbury and indeed with the other honourable members as we progress our work on road safety and young drivers. I congratulate her once again for securing this important debate. Thank you.
Julia Buckley to sum up.
Thank you, Sir Desmond, and I'd like to thank all the members who've taken the time to come today, to listen, to contribute, and again to thank our families, bereaved families and campaigners for their time and listening again to stories which can only be upsetting. I'd also like to thank the Minister for her time, but also that clearly she was listening to the messages that we've put forward today. You could hear that in her summing up at the end, and we thank you for that. I'm particularly pleased to hear that you might go away and consider the inclusion of Harvey's hammer as a safety measure. I hope that you would made note also of the member from Tewkesbury who described a local initiative. I don't know whether it features in the Driver 2020, but that educational IT piece takes that post-test driving collision from 1 in 5 to 1 in 33. So please also...
Order. The motion lapses.
So sorry.